Okay, here's a close-up shot of the workbench, and as you can see we have some holes over here where we put the screws in. I'm going to actually fill those up with 3 8-inch dowels, and what I'm going to do is add a little bit of glue, plug it into the holes there, and cut off the excess. Once it dries, I'll come back and I'll sand everything. Okay, as you can see, I filled up the holes, and now I'm just going to wait for it to dry before sanding it. Okay, so here we are. We've gone ahead and filled up the screw holes with wood putty, and I've sanded it down flush. And we brought the workbench outside, and now what we're going to do is just paint the workbench. I chose to go with black, so I'm mixing up the paint now, and let's get started. Okay, well, there's just one side of the workbench done. So what do you guys think? You guys like the black, or should I kept it natural and sanded it and kept it wood? Post in the comments below what you guys think about it. Okay, so I saved you guys the trouble of painting and sitting there watching me paint these workbenches and watching paint dry. But here are the two workbenches that are painted. Now, as you can see, I didn't paint the top section of the workbench as well as the top sections over here. And that's only because that's going to be all covered with plywood. Before I go ahead and put the plywood down, I've already cut the plywood down to size, roughly 2 foot by 4 foot. The only things I have to do now are to notch out where the legs go, and then I'll seal the plywood before putting the plywood on. I'll seal the bottom side of the plywood, and then once I put the plywood on the actual workbench, then I'll seal the plywood again on the top side. Now on the top of the workbenches, I'm actually going to put 2 sheets of plywood. So what I'm going to do is once I get the plywood on top of this workbench, you'll see that I'll screw right down into the workbench here from the top of the plywood. And then afterwards, I'll put the second sheet of plywood on top, and then I'll screw from the underside so that way the top stays nice and clean without any screw holes or anything. But I'll show you that when we get to it. Okay, so here we have the plywood that's going to go to on the bottom of the workbench. And what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to notch out a corner here. I've already marked this side. But what I'm going to do is find the dimensions of the actual legs, which in my case is 3 inches. And I'm going to basically move the square here up against the side and mark off 3 inches and draw a line straight across. And then I'll do the same thing on this side. And that's basically going to be what I cut out. And once I cut that out, how I'll cut this out is I will cut it out not on the inside of the pencil mark, but I'll cut it on the outside of the pencil mark line, just so that I have a little bit of extra wiggle room to squeeze in. I don't want this to be super tight and very difficult to push in on the bottom, especially since if I make it super tight, what's going to happen is this is going to scratch up the paint that I've just done on the workbench, and that's just going to be another step of having to go up, retouch up the paint and everything. So I'm just going to make it slightly bigger. It's not going to make a huge difference. It's not structural or anything like that. So yeah, that's what I'll do. Okay, so let me go ahead and mark up the other 2 corners and we'll get to cutting. Now, if you do want straight cut, you could do this many different methods. You could use a circular saw, hand saw. You can even use a template with a router and then chip the corner away. I'm going to go ahead and use actual jigsaw for this. If you want a straight cut, you could freehand it, of course, or you can use the square itself as a guide, just like this, and then you can make the cut. So I'm just going to go ahead and freehand it because, like I said, it's not going to be perfect, and that's okay because this is going on the bottom, which will also be covered with boxes or other stuff. Maybe I'll make drawers or anything like that. Okay, so there you go. I've gone ahead and cut that notch out. Let me cut out the other notches and we'll try to squeeze it in place and see if it fits and make any micro adjustments that we need if it doesn't fit. Okay, so we're done with the cutting. Let's go ahead and move these out of the way. Let me move the camera back just a little bit and let's see if it fits or not. So in order to put this in, what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide it in at a slight angle here. And let's see if we can drop it into place. Ta-da! There we go. So it fits. And what I'll do is I'll check the sides. If it's not flush, what I may do is I may just go in and clean it up a little bit. I may not. But it fits. And there's the bottom piece of our workbench. Okay, so let me do the other one and I'll come back and I'll do the top with you guys. Okay, so here we go. Just getting another piece of that plywood. We're going to place it on top. Should fit exactly since it's a 2 foot by 4 foot section. However, if it doesn't, may need to trim off a small section here and there just to make it perfect. But before we do that, the plywood's a little warped. But we can fix that with just screwing it down. So I'm going to pre-drill with a countersink bit, and then I'll use construction screws. These are number 8, 1 1/4 inch, and then I'll just screw it down in the corners first, and then go in periodically in certain areas, and then screw it down to the workbench. This isn't the final surface, so I don't really mind screwing it down on the top surface of the workbench here. I mean, you could, if this is going to be your final workpiece, final step for your workbench, but I plan on adding another plywood on top of this, and then I'll screw it from the underside of the workbench, so that way the top doesn't have any holes or screw marks or anything like that. And then I'll be able to work on creating an area for the T-track, and then just have a nice clean surface for myself. So anyway, let's go ahead and start countersinking these in. So what I like to do is just get one corner started. And then that way, if I need to shift or shim or move, I can still move this corner here. And then usually I like to go into the opposite corner or the other side. come into the final corner here. So in this state, the workbench is technically complete. You don't have to add any more screws. I like to add more screws as insurance. So here I'll come in and I'm just eyeballing this. I'll add 4 along this side, 4 along this side, and then what I'll do is I'll add 1, 2, 3 more along the edges here for a total of, from corner to corner, 5 screws. That's usually how I will tie it down, and then the other section is the middle here. Right, I'll probably add in 3 more or 2 more screws in the middle here, and then that'll tie down the entire workbench to the bottom. Okay, so we'll come back once that's all done. Okay, so we're all done. On to the next step, which is to add the second plywood, which is a little bit nicer, on top of this as our final surface. Okay everybody, so I'm sorry I wasn't able to show what I did, but I put this piece of plywood that I cut down to rough size on top of the other plywood that we attached. And then I went ahead and, as mentioned, countersunk and screwed from the bottom. Now I didn't put the screw all over the center, anywhere in the center, and I just screwed along the edges on the inside. And the reason for that is because once I put the 2 workbenches together on the side and then have a station for the miter saw, I'm going to cut a little groove here somewhere for the T-track, and I didn't want to run into the possibility of having a screw in the way of where I route out the groove for the T-track. So once I do the T-track and I get that secured in place, what I'll do is I'll go back from underneath and measure out from edge to where the T-track is, and then countersink and screw from underneath again. Okay, but for now, what we're going to do is, now that this table is firmly attached for the time being, the edges are not completely flush, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a flush trim router bit, and then I'm going to go ahead and flush it up on the side so that's nice and even all the way around. Okay, there you have it. So now it's flushed up all the way to the side, perfectly trimmed up. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a sander, and I'm going to sand the entire surface, and I'm going to round over the edges a little bit so that it's not as sharp, and to get rid of some of these little burrs. And then we'll be ready for the finish, which is just a clear coat. Okay, there we go. That was just 80 grit sandpaper. I don't think I have to go any more, especially for just a workbench. I could go 120 and then over to 180 and 220 and etc. But to be honest, the plywood was pretty smooth to begin with, and using the 80 grit sandpaper, I just roughed up the edge a little bit to knock down any high spots, cleaned up the edges so that they're not as sharp, And I think that's good enough for me, to be honest. The next step for me is to just wipe it down a little bit so I get all the dust off. And then after I get all the dust off, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and put a coat of polyurethane. This is Varthane's triple thick polyurethane. I'll go ahead and use that. It's gonna dry clear matte, and then let it dry, and then I'll be done. There we go. Now let's just let it sit and dry. And then after it dries, I'll come back and then do another light sanding. Maybe around 220. 180 would be okay too. And then put a second coat on. Now I'm not going to have the same finish as a sprayer. Let's put it in the comments below. What do you guys think? Would you prefer sprayer or brush? Personally, for me, I would like to get a sprayer one day, so that way I don't have to do it by brush, and it would get a nice even coat, but that's for some time in the future, I guess. Alright, let's just let it sit and let it dry. Okay, so the workbenches have the polyurethanes coated on top and bottom for both number 1 and 2 workbenches. And I'm just going to let it sit here and dry for the next 2 hours. And I'm going to call this project finished. I may come in and do a light sanding and put another coat on or not, but I'm gonna spare you guys from watching me do it all over again. But once it's done, the next step I'm going to do is move it over to the designated area where I want to put it and clear all this out. And then I'll also try to measure up the spacing between the 2 workbenches where I can put the miter saw. And then I'll probably cut the groove in to put the T-track in and set everything up. And so that'll be in the next video. So hopefully you guys can tune in. If you enjoyed watching the video, learn a thing or two, or have any suggestions and comments of what I could have done better, please post in the comments below, hit the like, and subscribe to the channel, and follow for more projects in the future. Okay, thank you for watching, everybody, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.